We just got another one. A big body for the line of scrimmage. From the 501 to the 305. Anthony Kennedy Jr. Welcome to the U.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I may have lost count, but I think that's 6 verbal commits in 7 days. Miami is on an absolute tear. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and writer for Canes County at Rivals. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. On this episode, it's not all been great news. We did have a Miami target at receiver who chose one of our in-state rivals. We'll discuss why. We'll talk about Miami's updated class of 2026 recruiting ranking as the Canes continue to add more verbal commits and they continue to climb. And yes, Miami's newest verbal commit is a behemoth on the defensive line, a player who visited about a month ago and decided on a Friday night what better time to lock in a verbal commitment with the U. Anthony Kennedy Jr. joins Miami's defensive line. Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. I guess another SEC state for Miami to plant their flag in, right? Been landing players out of Alabama and Georgia and Louisiana in recent years. Why not put Arkansas in that one as well? And for Kennedy, there were a lot of schools interested, but it came down to 3 finalists for him. He chooses the U over SMU and over Missouri. He's a former Mizzou verbal commit, in fact. The reason why he decommitted from Mizzou back in May was that their former defensive line coach, who was his primary recruiter there, stepped away, and so that shook up his recruitment. But even after decommitting to Mizzou, they were trying to get him back into their class, and he did make an official visit there within the last couple of weeks. But Miami ends up edging this one out. And Kennedy also holds offers from the likes of Georgia, LSU, Tennessee, Michigan, Florida, Auburn, his home state school in Arkansas, among others. So a lot of players, a lot of teams, I should say, have been interested in this player. Now, he is listed on the recruiting sites at 6'3.5", but he said he was actually, I think he was responding to an X post from Gabby Urrutia at Inside the U, where he says he's now up to 6'5", 335 pounds. So when I talk about Kennedy being a big body and a bully in the line of scrimmage, he's got that size profile. I know our friend, the truth teller, Bruce Warner, is listening to this, and he's licking his chops. Miami, of course, still has more work to do in this class on the defensive line, but this is a nice get. According to 24/7 Sports, Anthony Kennedy is the 36th ranked defensive lineman in the class of 2026, and he's the 5th overall player from the state of Arkansas. This is a 4-star defensive lineman, a 4-star recruit. He made his official visit to Miami back on the weekend of May 30th. So that was the first of the big OV weeks. And this is one of those where I guess there had been some Miami buzz, and then the perceived buzz over the past few weeks had gotten pretty quiet. But sometimes perception is not reality. Like every now and then, recruits will kind of work quietly behind the scenes, and Miami staff, Mario Cristobal loves to work quietly. The loafers move in silence. So I don't think me and a lot of others even realized how much buzz there was for Anthony Kennedy. And, late in the week here, that started to heat up again when he announced he was going to make that decision on Friday between Mizzou, SMU, and Miami. That's when the Hurricanes really started to get some buzz. And he made his official visit, I mentioned, on May 30th. A week prior to that, Jason Taylor went out to Arkansas to visit him at his high school. So, JT put in the legwork. I think that's when they locked in the official visit. So JT and Damian Lewis, Miami's defensive tackles coach, have really put in the work for Kennedy's recruitment. Kennedy this past season in high school, He racked up 23 tackles, 11 tackles for loss. That's what Miami wants from their defensive line. Penetration, disruption, TFL. He had 11 of those last year, and he had 6 sacks from the interior. But he does have versatility along the defensive line because he's very athletic. Kennedy, his frame has really been filling out from what I can tell over the last couple of years. Up through his sophomore year in high school, was also a high-level basketball player. So he was the dual sport, but as he moves closer to college, he's been focusing more on football. He's been getting a lot bigger, and he's going to bring that 6'5", 335-pound frame to Miami. And hey, building a pipeline to the Kennedy family is not a bad idea, because for Anthony Kennedy, he's got a younger brother who's class of 2029, which I think would make him about to head into 9th grade, if I'm not mistaken. Math is not my strong suit. I think 2029 would put him in 9th grade this year. But the younger brother, Bryson Kennedy, already looks like an elite quarterback prospect. He's already, I think, 6'2", 210, which for, 15-year-old kid is incredible. All right, so with adding Anthony Kennedy to Miami's defensive line, the second defensive tackle that the Hurricanes have now landed in this class. The Hurricanes have the 6th ranked class in America. They're up to 19 verbal commits now. So Miami at number 6. Remember, they recently moved in front of Clemson. So the Hurricanes are trying for the 4th straight cycle to have the number 1 class in the ACC. Seems like it's going to be Clemson, Miami, and Florida State, who's been climbing a bit in recruiting, that those 3 are going to battle it out for the top recruiting class in the ACC. Miami has had that in recent years. So at number 6, Miami's right in front of Clemson, right in front of Florida State at number 8, then Ohio State at number 5, Georgia, Texas A&M, Notre Dame, and USC rounds out the top 5 with the current top class in the country with 30 verbal commits, 11 more than Miami has at this moment. So that's where Miami now stands after landing Anthony Kennedy Jr., who joins Tyson Bacon as the second defensive tackle in the class. We'll talk about how many DTs Miami wants to take in this class of 2026. And I mentioned we had a decision on Thursday that went in a different direction and never a direction we wanted to go. So what happened with Jason Lopez? We'll talk about that and so much more. You want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Folks, we are only getting started with game time. Guys, as we inch closer to the season, we're like a little more than 60 days away from Miami versus Notre Dame. It's going to be here before you know it. Game Time and the Game Time app, that's where you want to get your tickets. If you've ever decided at the last minute to head to a game with friends and family, maybe it's game day, you suddenly realize you want to be in those stands, that's exactly where Game Time comes in. It is the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money that you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes that possible, and they make buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the Game Time app actually drop the closer you get to the event. And they've even got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views from the app before you buy, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Folks, I've been using Game Time exclusively for the last couple of years. Before I started my European tour over here, I took my family to see an AC/DC concert a couple of months ago. We had a fantastic time, got the best deals, the best seats, and the best features on the Game Time app. Whether you're looking for Florida Panthers games, they're going to try to defend their Stanley Cup again, Miami Dolphins, Miami Hurricanes, obviously, you want to check out the Game Time app. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download Game Time, create your account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. So Miami adds defensive lineman, 4-star defensive tackle Anthony Kennedy Jr. to their class of 2026. I did receive, by the way, folks, you're going to want to hear this, a scouting report from the recruiting overlord, Brian Smith, the host of the Portal podcast, which you should check out. Here's what he told me about Kennedy. He scouted him before. He says, massive and athletic. Kennedy does a great job of using his hands to disengage and plays in the backfield. Needs a year to reshape his body, but he's definitely underrated, Brian said. And he added, if Kennedy played in Florida, he'd be a much higher ranked recruit. Yeah, because we mentioned Arkansas is a 5th rated player in that state. They don't get the sort of scouting coverage and buzz that, a lot of the other states like Florida, Georgia, Alabama, like Arkansas doesn't really get that sort of hype and coverage in the high school football scene. So I like that comment that if he played in Florida, he'd be a lot higher rated than he is. And I think the process of reshaping his body is already in progress when you talk about him saying that he's up to 6'5", which I guess, that's God-given, right? You don't you can't work out and get taller, but he seems to be filling out that frame as well. So Anthony Kennedy is a nice addition to Miami's recruiting class. So that makes 2 defensive tackles. Tyson Bacon, who Miami landed a little over 2 weeks ago. Kennedy, we are in the mix, very high in the mix for James Johnson from Miami Northwestern. But keep your expectations in check because, about 24 hours away from JJ's decision, he's the top-rated defensive tackle in the entire class. The recent buzz has been Georgia, right? Miami had some buzz for a period of time. And he's an interesting prospect is, Johnson, impeccable defensive tackle. I know he plays at a South Florida high school, but he hasn't actually played a season there. He just moved over from North Fort Myers to Northwestern in Miami to play his final season. So he's like kind of, but not really a South Florida prospect, but it's a player Miami wants, but it's a player that, and we hope this changes on Saturday because he's making his announcement Saturday, June 28th. But for the time being, he has been trending more towards Georgia. Now, I was asked by some of our listeners if, like, the reason why Miami turned up the heat for Kennedy is that directly because they don't think they're going to land Johnson. I don't think these two things are related. And this is not me saying, hey, we're getting Johnson as well, but I think Miami wanted Anthony Kennedy regardless because our understanding is they would like to land 4 defensive tackles in this cycle. So that would not have excluded Kennedy. Miami obviously would love to land James Johnson. If not tomorrow, they're going to keep recruiting him until National Signing Day. Freddie Wilson from Spruce Creek in Port Orange, 3-star defensive tackle, is also somebody that Miami has been in the mix for. He's 6'2", 265 pounds. Freddie Wilson is going to be announcing on July 6th. There are some predictions out there that could see him landing with the Miami Hurricanes. We're still, obviously about 2 weeks away roughly from that decision. So we got a ways to go there. But Miami is looking to try and land a big defensive tackle class, but the ones they have so far are Anthony Kennedy Jr., who joins Tyson Bacon, who are 2 players I really like and 2 players that the Miami Hurricane staff seems to really like. So we keep chugging onward. Now we got some news yesterday, and I'm over on the other side of the Atlantic, so maybe I might have missed a few memos on this one, but I didn't know that Jason Lopez, 4-star receiver out of Chaminade, was going to be making a decision and an announcement on Thursday. Like that caught me by surprise. And as you know, because I didn't give him a welcome to, the good guys to start this episode, he didn't pick Miami. Jason Lopez ended up picking the Florida State Seminoles yesterday. That's who got his verbal commitment. And as he would have done at Miami or anywhere else he was going to go, he's going to play both football and basketball at Florida State. Now, despite the fact that Miami had and has just landed Vance Spafford, who's a similar player on paper to Jason Lopez, I guess it was my understanding that Miami was still trending there for Lopez, who just had his official visit to Miami this past week. And then, a day later, Vance Spafford commits to Miami. But it seems like the Spafford commitment was part of what has nudged Lopez in a different direction. I do believe that Florida State used that when Spafford picked Miami. Florida State used that to entice Lopez to Florida State. since he and Spafford are similar built players who would be competing for playing time in the slot at Miami. So that may have nudged him towards Florida State. Now, if it really was, as I characterize it here, if it really was an either or situation, I'm more than happy landing Vance Spafford. I think Miami probably did slightly better there. Spafford, as we've discussed this week, is lightning quick, one of the most elite receivers in the country. I just think that, I know people are going to feel a certain way since Lopez goes to Chaminade. And, a lot of folks down here will say you got to prioritize the local players, but honestly, you got to prioritize the best possible players. Whether those players come from California, like Spafford, or Arkansas, like Kennedy, you prioritize the best possible players, and that is what Miami has done here. So, with Vance Spafford, and of course, we talked about Tyron Evans, who committed to Miami the other day. Those are the two receivers Miami currently has in their class of 2026, and they've already got 6 offensive linemen committed. They may try to add another one. So, folks, by the way, with adding Kennedy, Miami has landed 6 verbal commits in a 7-day span. That's a streak. They've kept me very busy overseas. So Anthony Kennedy Jr. joins receiver Tyron Evans, who committed a couple of days ago. Tight end Israel Briggs, who committed on Tuesday. Jalen Jones, 2027, who committed, I think, Monday. Spafford, who flipped from Georgia to Miami on Monday. Ashari Charles, who committed on Sunday. The 4-star edge rusher, excellent player out of Venice, Florida. By the way, I'm going to be in Venice, Italy tomorrow. So maybe I'll run into Ashari Charles. Maybe he's from Venice, Italy, not Florida. We'll cross paths tomorrow. And Justin Edwards on, I think, Saturday was the one who kicked off this run, the 4-star or 3-star, linebacker who was committed to Rutgers and flipped to Miami. So honestly, with all the circumstances surrounding Jason Lopez, I'm still a little bit annoyed with him. And, fine young man, maybe he'll flip to Miami down the road. But Lopez, he disrespected the Donno vacation. So you guys know the drill. When I'm out of town, or in this case, overseas, the trade-off is if I'm going to be out here having an awful time in Western Europe and, making this tremendous sacrifice to spend time in Venice and Milan and Crete and out in the mountains where I am now, if I'm going to make this tremendous sacrifice for Miami, these players have to understand it is mandatory to commit to the U, that you don't commit to other places. When I'm on vacation, you're always supposed to pick Miami. So Jason Lopez, maybe he can make this right before National Signing Day, but he disrespected the Donno vacation because we never lose players when I'm on vacation. Maybe James Johnson, who, is going to pick tomorrow, is going to make this right, and he'll shock Georgia and pick Miami so he can return the balance towards the vacay. But in all seriousness, I appreciate everyone who made Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. It's always nice to have a Friday night commitment. So welcome to the U, Anthony Kennedy, and man, so many players, 6 new Miami Hurricanes within the past 7 days. They've kept us all very busy, and I'm loving every minute of it. So make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to Locked On Canes, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Odyssey app, subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your pods, and we'll either talk to you sometime on Monday or the next time Miami lands a verbal commit. We'll talk to you right here on the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.